Hello, this is Luke Hunt for The Diplomat, and with me for this month's podcast is Leslie Lopez. Now, Leslie is a terrific journalist. He's got an extensive resume, multiple award-winning correspondent, Wall Street Journal, The Edge Review, the Singapore Straits Times, and today I'm going to start by asking Leslie, whose coverage has mainly come out of Malaysia over many years, is that how have things changed in this country since Mahathir Mohamad came back into power at the elections last year?
Hi Luke, thanks for that intro. A lot has changed, and at the same time, little has changed too.
Right.
In the sense that, no, I don't think any country has gone through a change in power of a ruling coalition that's been around for 6 decades with a peaceful transition, especially for Malaysia, which hasn't seen this kind of a thing, of a handover of power. So that was a huge change that greeted this election result. I think that was a big positive for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the new government had started off well, but I think as we go on now, we're coming to 10 months into the new administration. They're encountering problems on just running the government because they're generally inexperienced.
You've also got a bureaucracy that's been in power for a long, long time.
Precisely.
With old allegiances which die hard.
Exactly. They may not be really stifling straitjacket, but the ability to put up hurdles, impediments, are being felt now, which is why.
Yeah.
And that has led to some kind of, some sort of inertia actually in what the government wants to do, pushing things forward. It's taking a slight toll on the economy. It's hard for government to push out policies because you have a civil service that can set up obstacles actually.
Right.
But I think the other problem is also that the new government may have overreached in its election promises, and it's finding it very, very difficult today to deliver them. So you have Malaysians, after 10 months, promised a lot of change, but seeing very little actually. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges facing the Mahathir administration this time around.
Okay. The economy is an interesting point, given that Mahathir has been quite outspoken in eschewing Chinese investment, and for good reason. If you look at Chinese debt traps around the region and the way Najib had indulged Beijing, but at the same time, can Malaysia afford this kind of decision making? And as you were saying, the inertia in the bureaucracy and the development plans that they once had seem to be falling by the wayside.
The economy is interesting. Malaysia is in one of the largest open trading nations in the world, easily in Southeast Asia. And for a long time now, there has been trouble actually finding new growth generators for the economy. Since the 1998 currency crisis, there's been a lot of government stimulus spending that has led economic activity in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. And I think the new government's challenge, it's cancelling projects that could be burdensome to public coffers is a good move, always. But I think also relationships like the ones with China, which is Malaysia's largest economic part, to be managed delicately.
Right.
Large state, public pronouncements actually sometimes don't help.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that the new government will need to navigate. Secondly, I think what is more pressing is that the government needs to come out with some kind of a new economic blueprint on where Malaysia will position itself in a new ASEAN.
Right. They have put that, and they have pushed back the great Malaysian dream, although I think it's too often overstated in becoming a first world country by 2020. That's been pushed right back. I do think these sorts of targets are a bit silly, to be honest.
I agree.
But nevertheless, it's for a lot of people here that these sorts of targets are goals, and they're seeing those targets evaporate.
Well, they've evaporated because there has been what we're seeing today is actually years of destruction to a system.
Right, and this is, of course, Najib Razak.
Well, it's not just that. I think it goes back to the last 30, 40 years.
Right, and that would include
include
Mahathir's.
Dr. Mahathir too. And
Right.
so a lot of these things, I think the less than effective role played by institutions, is largely a result of, the previous administration to which Mahathir was part of. Now, coming on that point, I think that's where Malaysia really needs to focus on, rebuilding these institutions, because the reason why 1MDB happened was because there was no check and balances.
Right, and of course you're talking about the One Malaysia
Exactly.
Berhad Fund, which
which has become this global scandal that Malaysia is best known of
Sure.
today. And I think that wasn't just the toxic mix of business and politics in play, but also I think a lot of people fail the Malaysian people, not just the politicians, not just the civil service, but also bankers, accountants, lawyers that facilitated all of this.
the wealth funds.
Exactly. So this is something I think that needs to be addressed. I think what is key is to actually find out what really happened, to get down to the bottom of this. That would mean finding out civil servants who were complicit, politicians who were complicit, and everyone was complicit, and dealing with this, making sure thorough audit review is done. So something like this doesn't repeat itself. The government Malaysia can't afford another 1MDB. I mean, we've had many scandals, from the steel fiasco, Perwaja during Mahathir's time, BMF. I know Mahathir's 22-year premiership was riddled with these financial scandals. So, but clearly 1MDB is something that global proportions.
It was a big kahuna compared with what preceded it.
Well, not only that, if you bunch all the scandals together during the previous government and what happened to 1MDB, I mean, we're talking maybe 2 1MDBs in the previous administrations. So, but my point is that 1MDB became global in nature because these guys decided to raise money in international markets, and basically because it was US dollar, brought them under the oversight of international regulatory agencies. Unlike previous scandals that were largely domestic driven, it didn't get that much of an international
and more easily covered up.
Exactly. So, but I think, that being said, it is still something that needs to be reviewed, audited, and really examined very closely, so these things don't happen again.
Yeah. Well, we are starting to see that happen. Najib Razak has been charged with corruption, and just recently Musa Rahman, the Chief Minister of Sabah, has also been charged under for money laundering and under the Counter-Terrorism Finance Act. And there are others to follow as well. And of course, there have been the murders of 2 people that have been tied up with all these scandals, and those murders involve foreign countries. You have one police officer in Australia who fled here who was blamed for the murder of the Mongolian model, and then there was the deputy prosecutor who was found in a barrel of cement. How far do you think the justice and the judicial system will go in terms of laying all this out to bear? Which goes back to, and that includes the auditing of the financial institutions.
I think it will play out. It will play out, but I don't think the story is written yet, because we're going to see some curve benders actually, on this, and there are going to be surprises. I'm sure.
Yep.
Just like the previous cases that gripped the country, over the prosecutions against Anwar Ibrahim, who's going
absolutely,
to be
and the detail that came out there was amazing.
So we're going to see a lot of. I'm sure we're going to be caught up with a lot of surprises, because something this big couldn't have happened without a lot of people being complicit, which would include people in government, in institutions, in watchdog agencies, and things like that. So we're going to see. I think we're going to see a number of surprises moving forward with the trial. But I'm sure this is something that the new government doesn't want to cover up. I think they will pursue it right to the end.
It's certainly their credibility and Mahathir's legacy.
For for sure. And I think that is the main reason why I think that will be the case. You know?
Okay. Moving on with Mahathir's legacy, do you think he'll be content to remain at the helm for 2 years and then to hand over to Anwar Ibrahim?
From all that I've heard from people close to him, and that really is the case.
Now, he's 93.
He's 93. He doesn't, he's not the Mahathir Mohamad of 20 years ago.
Right.
And he clearly is not the strong man that he was 20 years ago. He is today Prime Minister and a member of the component, and his component party is actually the smallest component party in the ruling coalition. That doesn't give him the kind of clout he used to have before, which I think is must, to some extent, frustrate him, because he's a man in a hurry, and he wants to get a lot of things done quickly, and that not having that kind of power that he's used to, I think must frustrate the old man. I'm sure he wants to use the time that he's publicly stated, the 2-year time frame before handing over power to Anwar, which I think he'll do, to get as many things done and write as many things that he can, And I think to a large extent you're right. It is about his legacy, and a lot of Malaysians, especially the younger voters, who played a crucial role in the last election, and will do so in the coming elections, have very little historical perspective about the initial Mahathir years. It's largely about, I think, during Mahathir's time, a large middle class was created, and it was time where people bought their second cars, second homes, and so everyone has lent generally a soft focus to his brand of authoritarianism. I think so. The younger generation don't know of the Mahathir that many of us who covered him for years, in the earliest, remember him for. But clearly, this helps him with sort of repairing that legacy.
And he has, of course, announced that Malaysia will abandon the death penalty. He's announced that Malaysia will sign up to the International Criminal Court, which has all sorts of ramifications. Particularly, Malaysia was one of the few countries to speak out against Myanmar and what happened with the Rohingyas, and we'll be looking at ICC hearings on that in regards to 6 generals in genocide. He seems to be pushing his country more and more towards international norms, which, particularly from the younger generation's perspective, that would be seen as welcomed.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, Mahathir still has, or still reveals some of his old positions, but I think the Mahathir this time around clearly is the one that you've
right.
He who sees Malaysia needs to be more internationalized. You cannot be blinkered. So I think that clearly is the man. And as long if he puts this kind of point of view with the new government, sort of like sows these seeds, right? That would be a very good thing.
How do you think Anwar will shape up as Prime Minister?
There's always a debate about this, but I think the honest point is that Anwar hasn't been tested.
Yep.
He's been tested as finance minister, and until he was removed by Mahathir, he actually was finance minister that helped bring about a balanced budget.
Right.
And he actually put Malaysia in a very, very good financial position to deal with the onslaught from the 1998 crisis that allowed Mahathir to spend a whole lot of money and try and bring back the economy that was hit by this regional currency crisis. So I guess proponents of Anwar, they will see he actually listened to technocrats, did all the right things, and managed the economy well. That is clearly a plus point. People his detractors will, however, look at his, Islamic past and all of that. But in my view, Anwar really is not tested. I mean, we know what a Mahathir Prime Minister is. So,
and he was ruthless when he was Prime Minister.
Exactly, yeah.
He broke down his own party in UMNO and rebuilt it according to his own.
Yeah. So the job has eluded Anwar for a long time. It clearly, this time around, it looks like he will become Prime Minister, and then he will be tested. He will be tested. So I'm open with this.
Right.
With his premiership.
It's been talked about for so long.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, give him the job and let's see.
Exactly. I agree with that.
How divisive have the events of the last 12 months been in Malaysia? I mean, what I mean by that is the election result itself came across as a coherent Malaysia, speaking out, saying we've had enough of corruption, this is too much money, this is too in your face. No, we don't want, and UMNO was voted out for the first time since independence. But also, UMNO's quick to claim that the native Malays did not desert it the same way ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indians did. There's talk of UMNO doing a deal with PAS, which are more hardline, a more harsher brand of Islam, I guess. Malaysia has often been criticised as a society divided by religion and ethnicity, but the election result would almost seem to prove otherwise. How do you see that, particularly now that we're 1 year after the election almost?
We're almost 1 year after the election, but a close study of the election results showed actually that nearly 70% of the Malay voting base voted either for PAS, which is PAS, or UMNO. UMNO got the bulk of it, of course. So that's 70%. Now, consensus studies show that come 2025, 70% of the country's population will be Malay. So there's really no running away from this race thing in Malaysia. I think what the new government's challenge should be is to impress upon the Malay community, which UMNO's and the previous government's strategy has always been to put the Malays under siege. Always remind them they need a stronger Malay government to ensure their rights and all that. But that actually is a fallacy. I think what the new government needs to do is to tell the Malay community that you're the majority here. They need to be empowered, not by handouts or preferential policies, but by injecting a lot more meritocracy in the system. Bringing them on par with the rest, getting them to be more confident, and that would require, a whole lot of stuff, educational reviews, taking over. I think one argument I advocate is to take over the main Malay language newspaper and start getting good journalism there, and not the parochial stuff, the race-based kind of tangent that they generally go on.
And these, of course, are issues that are plaguing the newspaper industry across the world. Exactly. What you're mentioning, though, in regards to the race-based policy of the Bumiputras, the favourable treatment they get, this goes back to what you were saying before about what brought about 1MDB, and that it's not necessarily just one man's government and the policies that he engendered, but this whole system that has been swept through since independence, and in particularly the race riots of 1969.
Precisely, I agree with that. Exactly. That really is something that Malaysia needs to deal with. I mean, here you have a country. Really, we're a country that's not yet a nation.
Right.
That's very much our case, and
a country of nations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Malaysians need to learn when they ask the question, so what are you? Rather than say I'm Malay or Chinese or Indian, they should just say I'm Malaysian.
Right.
That's what they should be saying.
Right.
And forget about what their race is. I think that should for starters, that should be just eliminated from any form.
And of course, that starts with the ID cards.
Exactly. So I think that would be a great start. And it will take generations, but you got to start somewhere.
Under Najib and his foreign minister Anifa Rahman, foreign policy wasn't one of their strengths, and I suspect that's because 1MDB had such a global impact that it was undermining Malaysia's relationship with foreign governments, particularly on the international markets. How far do you think Mahathir has gone to restoring some of that lost ground, if you will?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that the 1MDB scandal clearly handcuffed not only Najib but also his entire administration to do whatever it took to try and plug these holes, which meant going into a unending phase of recalibrating your foreign policy, actually, depending on to suit these unfortunate circumstances. I think on this front, Mahathir and the new government, even Anwar Mande, when he takes over, very much have a kind of clean slate to decide on what policy is going to be. And I think focus should be on what's going to be good for Malaysia, particularly in terms of the economy and how they build these relations.
Because Malaysia's always been one of those countries that prides itself on its ability to matter in the international diplomatic arena. In particular, I'm thinking of the Organisation of Islamic Conference, and also within ASEAN, where ASEAN is a disparate bunch of different types of governments, different types of religions, different types of ethnicity, the whole. And Malaysia Truly Asia does encapsulate a lot of that. And so, but with a clean slate, it would be interesting to see how they kind of reinvent that.
I think that you would, this is outside of India. I think Southeast Asia is probably home to the largest Muslim population.
Right.
Troubles in many parts of it. I think politicians like Anwar, and particularly so because he comes from Malaysia, which, unlike a lot of other Muslim countries, border on failed states, will be able to take up that leadership role. They just need to have a clear strategy on how to occupy that space. But I think it's a space that Malaysia can do well in, and especially play the role of peacemaker, say for example southern Thailand, southern Philippines. Really enter into these negotiations with the view to settle something, to reach some kind of settlement, actually, not allow it to just prolong and linger.
And despite all the corruption of the Najib years, it's easy to forget that there were one or two positives that came out. And in particular, I'm thinking about the, for want of a better term, war on terror, and that Malaysia was one of the great frights, particularly with Jemaah Islamiyah and its links with Abu Sayyaf and Osama bin Laden going back 10, 15 years ago. But the authorities here have been quite apt in putting a lid on all this and bringing it under control. They've done a very good job, in fact.
And I think they continue to do a pretty good job, actually. And they're highly regarded by regional intelligence agencies, in where intelligence sharing is concerned.
So sure, particularly with the West these days, where it's grown enormously.
So they have done very well, and I don't think that's going to change.
Right.
I think that's going to remain.
Could even form the basis for that white sheet as you were referring to.
Precisely, and I think like I said, Malaysia needs to formulate a new kind of foreign policy, the kind of space it wants to occupy, and there are niche that they can do, that the government can occupy.
On a final note, Malaysia has been important within ASEAN, and ASEAN has been criticised much lately. Its inability to deal with the issues like the South China Sea, the Rohingya crisis. In fact, it's never looked more divided than it is right now. How do you think you've got old-style Mahathir and Anwar back in power, and they were quite formidable within ASEAN back in the 80s and 90s. How do you think ASEAN will stack up over, say, the next 5 years with Mahathir concerned about his legacy and wanting to be a factor in this equation, in particular ASEAN's relationship with China?
Well, ASEAN is a thriving economic marketplace. There are a lot of kind of dark spots when it comes to how it's moving politically.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly the election in Malaysia last year was really a breath of fresh air.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think politically ASEAN will remain in a kind of a muddle for a while. Leadership, I think, will come for the region once governments they need to find a common platform. And I think turning this region of 600 over million people
Sure.
into a major economic marketplace could be that common platform.
And for that we need more travel, more the ability for people to move between countries.
Exactly.
And undertake
Freedom
different
of
types
movement,
of
exactly,
jobs.
I think one good thing to do would be to get these countries together and see what the EU did wrong.
Right.
And avoid those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And avoid those mistakes and apply that and create a new blueprint for ASEAN from an economic position. I mean, I think getting governments to come to any kind of agreement politically, it is going to be very, very difficult for ASEAN.
It's an interesting point, because the biggest criticisms of Asia at the moment, particularly in the markets, is that we have the Asian Economic Community, but it's restricted to just 8 different professions. Despite what the authorities might say, people are not really free to move from one country to another. There are enormous disparities, particularly in education. For example, a Cambodian nurse may well be qualified and of the correct standards, but she's not going to get a job in Thailand, and the qualifications aren't being recognised. And there seems to be a long way to go on this kind of score.
Exactly, and I think that's what these governments need to work on. Allow for more freedom of trade, intra-trade within ASEAN, and that would sort out a lot of the other problems, that governments tend to want to hold on to. They need to start allowing markets just to behave the way markets behave.
Markets.
Exactly.
And of course, that's one of the great criticisms of countries within ASEAN, is that too many of them are centrally focused, and that if, say, Thailand was to decentralise power out into the provinces, you might see the complaints may well become less. People will travel more. They don't need to be all in Bangkok. And similar arguments are said about Malaysia in Sabah and Sarawak, which are a lot further away from KL than, say, Cambodia is.
Precisely. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. And on that note, one final question. Do you think Mohammed Mahathir is going soft in his old age?
I think he's softer and he's mellow. He's mellowed, but his political instincts are second to none.
Not a bad thing. Leslie Lopez, thank you very much.
Thanks, man.